July 25, 1944, 9:37, west of St. Louis, Normandy. A thin veil of morning fog still lingered over the hedgerows when General Lieutenant Fritz Berline, commanding the Panzer Division, trained his binoculars across the fields. The familiar staccato of American artillery that had punctuated the past 6 weeks was conspicuously absent. The silence did not bring relief. Instead, it carried a sense of foreboding. Veterans of Rommel's Afrika Korps, seasoned through campaigns in North Africa and hardened by the ferocity of Soviet artillery along the Eastern Front, were positioned along the road leading to St. Louis. They had endured pounding from British guns at El Alamein and shells that had made the earthquake in previous battles. Yet, nothing in their collective experience could have prepared them for what was about to unfold. At exactly 9:38, an unprecedented concentration of American firepower was unleashed. More than 1,000 artillery pieces ranging from light 105mm howitzers to medium 155mm guns, heavy 8-inch howitzers, and the colossal 240mm opened fire simultaneously. Unlike traditional bombardments, which followed rolling schedules or sequential volleys, these shells, despite being fired from different distances, some from 6 miles, others from 15, were calculated to strike their targets at the very same instant. The precision required to coordinate this barrage was extraordinary. Each gun crew had accounted not only for the range and trajectory but also for the time each projectile would be in flight. A high-angle 105mm shell might take 23 seconds to reach its mark, while a 155mm long-range round could require 31 seconds. Firing commands were staggered backward from the intended moment of impact so that every shell, regardless of its origin, would land simultaneously. For the German defenders, this was not merely a conventional artillery strike. It was a stark demonstration of American industrial capacity, logistical coordination, and mathematical application to warfare, a synthesis of communication, calculation, and organizational discipline that transcended anything seen on European battlefields to that point. The onslaught would not only demolish fortifications and defensive positions but also challenge deeply ingrained notions of battlefield predictability and tactics. To grasp the full significance of this time-on-target tactic, one must consider the prevailing artillery doctrine of the era. For centuries, artillery deployment had relied on sequential or rolling firing patterns. Napoleon's grand batteries delivered devastating volleys in measured succession. World War I introduced creeping barrages that moved steadily ahead of advancing infantry. The Germans had developed their own doctrines, emphasizing concentration of fire at decisive points, Schwerpunkt refined through campaigns in Poland, France, and the early stages of Operation Barbarossa. Their methods stressed rapid build-up and immediate relocation, aiming to strike hard and disperse before counterattacks could materialize. Yet, the American approach at St. Louis represented a conceptual leap. By calculating time and distance with unprecedented exactness, coordinating across multiple calibers and units, and harnessing industrial and organizational might, the Allies had transformed artillery into a tool capable of delivering instantaneous, overwhelming shock over a wide front. In essence, it redefined the mechanics of war itself. During World War II, German forward observers, working in close coordination with battery commanders, were capable of directing artillery fire with remarkable speed and accuracy. The Wehrmacht took pride in this operational agility. Early clashes reinforced the perception of German artillery dominance as American units initially struggled to synchronize their firepower in North Africa. At the Kasserine Pass, for example, American batteries were spread out and often failed to concentrate their shots effectively, highlighting coordination deficiencies. However, German officers underestimated a crucial development: the U.S. Army was rapidly learning and adapting its artillery methods, blending traditional gunnery with modern industrial management concepts. This approach culminated in the innovation known as time on target, TOT, which fundamentally transformed artillery operations. Instead of viewing guns as isolated units assigned to specific local commands, American planners conceived artillery as a fully integrated network capable of delivering massive, precisely timed strikes across the battlefield. Achieving two relied on four interdependent innovations, both technological and organizational, that were largely unfamiliar to the Germans. The first was the Forward Observer (FO) system. Unlike the German observers, who typically coordinated with individual batteries, American FOs could direct entire artillery groups, including divisional-level resources. Each observer was equipped with SCR-619 radios, later replaced with the more advanced SCR-610, ensuring reliable, long-distance communication with Fire Direction Centers (FDCs) positioned miles behind the front lines. The SCR-619, described in Technical Manual 11/619 April 1945, operated on FM frequencies from 27 to 3738.9 MHz. Its successor, the SCR-610, standardized on September 29, 1941, offered 2032 watts of output and a dependable range of approximately 5 miles. The second innovation was the Fire Direction Center, a concept refined at Fort Sill in the 1932 and perfected under combat conditions. FDCs functioned as centralized calculation hubs where trained personnel used firing tables, slide rules, and graphical plotting boards to generate firing solutions for multiple batteries simultaneously, enabling coordinated synchronized strikes. Third, the Americans built an extensive and redundant communications network. Telephone lines were laid with exceptional diligence. An infantry division could string as much as 3,000 miles of wire during a single month of combat. This infrastructure ensured that fire orders could be transmitted instantly to dozens of artillery units, minimizing delays and miscommunications. The fourth element, often overlooked, was the rigorous standardization of ammunition. U.S. artillery shells, produced in factories from Pennsylvania to California, were manufactured to precise specifications. A 105 mm shell fired from any standard howitzer had predictable ballistic properties. In contrast, German ordnance production, increasingly reliant on forced labor across dispersed and inconsistent facilities, resulted in variable quality. German forces first observed rudimentary tot-like techniques during the Italian campaign in early 1944. At the time, many German officers dismissed these as coincidental or the result of luck rather than a systematic, deliberate doctrine. In reality, the Americans were establishing a revolutionary approach to artillery, one that combined industrial efficiency, meticulous planning, and innovative communication to achieve previously unimaginable battlefield coordination. The breakthrough at Anzio on May 23, 1944, represented the first significant display of concentrated artillery firepower that captured German attention. 16 battalions equipped with over 200 guns executed a meticulously coordinated bombardment against German defenses along the Caesar Line. This approach was not improvised. It had been honed through extensive experimentation. Earlier, the 9th Infantry Division had tested innovative firing techniques on barges during operations in Sicily, while the 1st Infantry Division further refined these methods during the Italian campaign. By the time of D-Day, the concept of synchronizing artillery to achieve simultaneous impact, later known as time on target, was increasingly incorporated into U.S. Army doctrine, even though German intelligence initially regarded reports of such tactics as exaggerations. Operation Cobra, initiated on July 25, 1944, marked the first large-scale application of this method in Normandy. General Omar Bradley assembled an unprecedented artillery array, the largest ever concentrated by American forces in Europe. The force included over 1,000 artillery pieces ranging from 105 mm howitzers to 8-inch guns, with the 7th and 8th Corps alone contributing 522 guns. Additional support came from 4.2-inch mortars and tank destroyers repurposed as artillery. The primary objective was a rectangular zone south of the Saint-Leu-Perriers Road, approximately 7,000 yards wide and 2,500 yards deep, occupied mainly by the Panzer Division Panzer and elements of the 5th Full. At 938 hours following an initial carpet bombing that had already stunned the defenders, every artillery piece opened fire in unison. Shells fired from distances between 5,000 and 25,000 yards struck simultaneously, delivering devastating impact across the German positions. Operation Cobra alone had been allocated a staggering 170,000 rounds of artillery, 140,000 for the 7th Corps and 27,000 for the 8th Corps. The bombardment proceeded in carefully timed sequences, successive waves of fire sweeping through enemy defenses, after which the American infantry moved forward. The Panzer Division, which had landed in Normandy with 14,000 men and 190 tanks, was effectively destroyed as an organized fighting force. General Fritz Bohlin's report to Field Marshal von Krug famously described the aftermath. His front lines resembled a lunar landscape, with at least 70% of his men either killed, wounded, disoriented, or otherwise incapacitated. What the Germans could not grasp fully was the precision behind the time-on-target technique. It was far more than massed fire, it was a complex calculation problem solved in real time. Synchronizing shells from multiple guns to land together required knowledge of each battery's exact coordinates, the precise distance to the target, the muzzle velocity of each artillery type, the weight and aerodynamics of the shells, wind conditions at various altitudes, air density and temperature, the effect. To manage these factors, the U.S. Army developed advanced graphical computation tools, including the Graphical Firing Table, GFT, and the Graphical Sight Table, GST, which allowed rapid, accurate calculation of firing solutions. The result was a methodical, almost mathematical orchestration of destruction, combining science, technology, and disciplined artillery execution on an unprecedented scale. During the summer of 1944, German artillery units, still dependent on traditional firing tables and calculations made separately by each battery, were unable to match the rapid operational tempo of their American counterparts. The Americans' ability to achieve simultaneous impact, what they called time on target, relied on an exceptionally advanced and integrated communication infrastructure far beyond what the Germans had previously faced. By July of that year, a single U.S. infantry division operating in Normandy possessed more radio equipment than an entire German corps had in 1940. Within a month, the 1st Division alone had deployed over 900 radios. Every artillery battery was equipped with multiple overlapping communication channels, including wired lines, radio systems, and messengers, ensuring redundancy and reliability. Fire direction centers maintained constant links not only with every battery under their command, but also with each forward observer and superior headquarters. This network of communication allowed American forces to achieve a feat that initially confounded German officers: the ability to concentrate artillery fire across a wide geographic area without physically massing the guns. Batteries positioned over 20 miles apart could simultaneously strike the same target with precise coordination. This represented more than just a tactical development. It was a direct reflection of American industrial and organizational strength applied to combat. Standardization was a key component of this capability. Every 105mm howitzer, whether produced at Rock Island Arsenal or Watervliet Arsenal, fired shells with identical ballistic properties. Ammunition manufactured in Pennsylvania was interchangeable with that from Missouri, all adhering to exacting specifications. This uniformity, achieved through mass production techniques, made the complex calculations required for coordinated fire possible. In contrast, German production, increasingly hampered by Allied bombing and relying on dispersed factories with forced labor, could not achieve the same level of consistency. Equally impressive to German observers was the American capacity to produce not only weapons but skilled personnel on a massive scale. The Army's fire direction centers at Fort Sill trained thousands of specialists throughout the war, ensuring that every artillery unit had highly competent staff capable of directing precise fire. The effectiveness of this system was dramatically illustrated during the German counterattack at Mortain, which began on August 7, 1944. Hitler had ordered a major thrust aimed at severing the American advance, committing the recently reconstituted 2nd and 1st SS Panzer Divisions, along with the 116th Panzer Division. As German armored formations massed for the offensive, American forward observers positioned on strategic high ground such as Hill 317 coordinated artillery strikes that devastated the attackers. The Morton engagement vividly demonstrated how time on target, supported by industrial-scale standardization, advanced communications, and trained personnel, could decisively shape the battlefield in ways the Germans had not anticipated. When the German offensive commenced at midnight, they faced a highly coordinated response from American artillery. Pre-arranged fire missions known as time-on-target (TOT) strikes were rapidly executed on designated coordinates. The U.S. 2nd Infantry Division alone conducted up to 20 such missions in a single night. Reports from Hill 192 indicated that the 30th Infantry Division, despite being outnumbered, orchestrated 2 strikes drawing on 7 separate artillery battalions throughout the hours of darkness. Each barrage inflicted instantaneous destruction on German staging zones, supply routes, and command positions. Survivors from the German ranks later described the bombardment as an impenetrable wall of relentless steel, halting their advance entirely. By dawn, the offensive had effectively ground to a standstill. Field Marshal von Kluge informed Hitler that further attacks were futile in the face of such overwhelming artillery dominance. The capacity to perform TOT strikes consistently reflected a profound advancement in military training. In a remarkably short span of less than 3 years, the U.S. Army transformed countless civilians into highly proficient artillery specialists. At Fort Sill, the Field Artillery School implemented a rigorous program that condensed decades of artillery theory into a focused 17-week curriculum. Cadets mastered ballistics, meteorology, survey methods, and battlefield communications. Crucially, they were trained to regard artillery not as isolated pieces of equipment, but as an integrated, coordinated system. The program prioritized practical, hands-on experience over abstract theory. Trainees executed thousands of simulated fire missions, repeatedly calculating TOT solutions until the procedures became instinctive. By the time they graduated, a fully competent Fire Direction Center (FDC) team could plan and coordinate a 10-battery TT strike in less than 3 minutes. This systematic approach to producing technical expertise astonished German officers who witnessed it in combat. Within just a few years, the United States had generated more fire direction experts than Germany had trained over several decades, demonstrating a highly industrialized, standardized model of military education. Executing a 2-strike required more than precision. It demanded vast quantities of material. A single mission could consume more ammunition than a German division typically received in an entire month. During Operation Cobra, U.S. artillery units expended over 170,000 rounds specifically allocated for the offensive. Behind these operations, a vast logistical network continuously delivered thousands of tons of shells from the beaches of Normandy to frontline batteries. Convoys ran without pause, sustaining an unbroken supply chain. The superior consistency and reliability of American munitions also exceeded German expectations, further amplifying the destructive effectiveness of the strikes. American artillery effectiveness in the later stages of World War II rested heavily on industrial precision and strict standardization. Each artillery shell was produced under tightly controlled conditions, ensuring uniform propellant quality, balanced internal mass, and highly consistent ballistic behavior. Because of this reliability, American gunners could calculate flight times with confidence, a prerequisite for executing time-on-target (TOF) fire missions with extreme accuracy. German ammunition production followed a very different trajectory as the war progressed. As factories were dispersed to avoid Allied bombing and shortages mounted, quality control weakened. Shells from different batches often varied in velocity and range. German artillery units could no longer rely on tables alone and were forced to conduct test firings whenever new ammunition arrived, simply to determine how far and how fast their shells would actually travel. American units, by contrast, operated on the assumption that every round would perform exactly as predicted. One feature of American artillery practice that drew particular attention from German officers was their systematic integration of meteorology into ballistic planning. Successful TOT fire depended not only on the gun and shell, but also on precise environmental data. Wind direction and speed at multiple altitudes, air density, temperature gradients, and humidity all influence shell trajectories and timing. The U.S. Army built a large and highly organized weather intelligence network to account for these variables. Every corps-level formation included dedicated meteorological teams that recorded atmospheric conditions at half-hour intervals. In addition, radio-equipped weather balloons were launched regularly, transmitting data from heights reaching approximately 30,000 feet. This information was rapidly relayed to fire direction centers, allowing calculations to be updated almost in real time. As a result, American artillery could sustain accuracy even when weather conditions shifted rapidly, a capability German forces increasingly lacked. This advantage became especially evident during the November 1944 fighting in the Hürtgen Forest. Fog, persistent rain, and unpredictable winds plagued the battlefield, conditions that traditionally degraded artillery performance. Despite this, American top missions retained their precision, while German counter-battery fire struggled to achieve comparable results. The campaign in the Hürtgen Forest shattered long-held German assumptions about the protective value of dense woodland. The terrain had been considered resistant to effective artillery fire, but American units adapted their methods. They developed specialized tree burst 2 missions, carefully timing shells to detonate within the forest canopy rather than on the ground. The explosions turned the trees themselves into weapons. During November 1944, the U.S. 4th Infantry Division, advancing through the forest, requested coordinated 2 strikes combining high explosive and white phosphorus rounds. The synchronized airbursts produced scenes later described by survivors as instantaneous chaos. Splintered wood fragments rained downward with lethal force, while burning phosphorus ignited leaf litter and undergrowth, spreading fire through the forest floor. Further south, the 28th Infantry Division employed massive tot barrages to neutralize entrenched German strongpoints hidden among the trees. One particularly concentrated strike on November 6 involved 12 artillery battalions firing simultaneously into an area roughly 500 meters square. More than 3,000 shells impacted within half a minute. Positions that had resisted infantry assaults for weeks were eliminated in seconds. The forest environment amplified the shock of these attacks. Thick foliage absorbed and distorted sound, reducing the audible warning normally provided by incoming artillery. German troops often had no time to react before the full weight of the barrage arrived. Medical units later reported unusually high levels of what they termed artillery-induced trauma, soldiers who had survived prolonged bombardment elsewhere but were psychologically shattered by the sudden synchronized destruction unleashed by tot fire in the woods. The most dramatic demonstration of time-on-target effectiveness occurred during the encirclement of German forces in the Falaise Pocket in August 1944. As German units attempted to withdraw through an ever-narrowing escape corridor, American artillery systematically saturated key roads and choke points with repeated 2 missions. On August 17 alone, documented American 2 strikes were carried out on the Falaise-Trun road at regular intervals throughout daylight hours. Each mission involved between 10 and 15 batteries firing in precise coordination. The result was sustained devastation inflicted on German columns attempting to flee the pocket. General Hans Eberbach, commanding the remnants of Panzer Group West, later reported that the intensity of the artillery fire made it impossible to move reserves forward or evacuate casualties. Any attempt at vehicle movement invited immediate destruction. The road itself soon earned a grim reputation among German troops as a corridor of death. Wrecked vehicles, dead horses, and abandoned equipment accumulated rapidly, creating physical obstacles that slowed retreating units. These bottlenecks made subsequent formations even more exposed to follow-up tot strikes. By the time the pocket fully closed on August 21, approximately 50,000 German soldiers had been taken prisoner and an estimated 10,000 killed, with artillery responsible for the majority of losses. Even withdrawal beyond the pocket offered little relief. As German forces fell back toward the Seine River later in August, they found that river crossings were no longer safe havens. American forward observers had already moved ahead of advancing ground units, occupying concealed vantage points overlooking every likely crossing site. At locations such as Vernon, Rouen, and Mantes, German efforts to construct pontoon bridges were immediately detected. Each attempt triggered rapid, coordinated two responses that shattered bridging equipment and inflicted heavy casualties. For the retreating German army, American artillery had transformed space, time, and terrain into a single, inescapable weapon system. The precision of American artillery in late 1944 reached a level that allowed entire bridges to be obliterated even while engineers were still in the process of construction. This systematic targeting of river crossings with carefully synchronized barrages demonstrated an extraordinary adaptability of the artillery tactics. Soldiers began to avoid crossing during daylight hours, leading to massive congestion along the riverbanks, which in turn became prime targets for further bombardments. By the end of 1944, the U.S. military had incorporated new technologies that amplified the destructive potential of coordinated artillery fire. Among the most significant innovations was the variable time (VT) fuse, commonly known as the proximity fuse, which saw its first major use in ground artillery during the Battle of the Bulge. These fuses allowed shells to detonate at an ideal height above the ground, maximizing the dispersal of fragments and increasing lethality. Once VT-fused shells were deployed on specialized artillery barges from December 1944 onward, their effectiveness surged dramatically. The resulting explosions created highly uniform patterns of destruction that rendered foxholes and slit trenches largely ineffective as shelter. During the war, over 22 million proximity fuses were manufactured, revolutionizing the application of artillery in the final campaigns. German forces, initially unable to understand the source of this devastation, speculated that the Americans had introduced entirely new weapon systems, such as remote-controlled aerial mines or advanced timed cluster munitions. The reality that the combination of precise timing and proximity detonation could produce such overwhelming results seemed almost deceptively simple. As American units advanced toward the Siegfried Line in September 1944, German commanders were confident that their heavily reinforced bunkers and steel-reinforced cupolas would withstand conventional artillery fire. The U.S. forces, however, adapted by creating tailored artillery missions designed specifically to neutralize fortifications. By coordinating instant detonation high-explosive shells with delayed fuse armor-piercing rounds, the Americans were able to simultaneously cause surface-level destruction and penetrate hardened defenses in a single, synchronized strike. At Gillenkersian in November, for example, the 84th Infantry Division faced extensive fortifications along the Siegfried Line. The division requested a concentrated artillery operation involving 12 battalions, totaling 144 guns, employing a mix of munitions to maximize impact. During the German Ardennes offensive in December 1944, the concept of time on target demonstrated its defensive power. Despite being initially caught off guard, U.S. artillery units rapidly regrouped and began executing coordinated barrages against advancing German spearheads. On December 19, as the 2nd Panzer Division moved toward Dinant, forward observers from the 3rd Armored Division called for immediate artillery support. Within 4 minutes, 8 battalions had computed firing solutions, unleashing a barrage that struck the German column in march formation and destroyed the lead battalion in under a minute. The capacity to concentrate firepower so quickly proved decisive in halting enemy advances. At Bastogne, surrounded American forces even requested strikes dangerously close to their own positions, effectively decimating German units attempting to break the perimeter. By March 1945, as Allied forces prepared to cross the Rhine, artillery coordination had reached its peak efficiency. River crossing operations were heavily supported by massive concentrations of artillery employing precise time-on-target techniques. On March 24, 1945, the Allies assembled an extraordinary concentration of over 4,000 guns, including 27 American pieces for the opening bombardment. The attack lasted 4 hours and featured synchronized strikes every 15 minutes, with hundreds of guns simultaneously delivering fire across kilometer-wide target zones. The scale and coordination were unprecedented. In preparation for these operations, American artillery units expended more than 65,000 tons of ammunition in March alone. German defenders later reported that the sheer force of the bombardment caused fatalities solely from the concussive impact, leaving soldiers dead without a single visible wound. At Oppenheim on March 2020, Patton's Third Army executed a crossing supported by an exceptionally coordinated artillery operation. The preparatory bombardment involved 33 battalions and more than 400 guns, all firing in precise unison. The entire sequence lasted just 1 minute, yet it unleashed approximately 10,000 shells onto German positions. German officers later reported that some units appeared to have been completely annihilated, leaving no survivors to recount the events. This phenomenon, which the Germans gradually began to understand, demonstrated the implementation of American industrial efficiency on the battlefield. The same organizational and production principles that allowed Detroit to roll out a new bomber every hour were applied to artillery operations. Massive coordination of guns and troops mirrored industrial assembly lines, extending the logic of mass production into the sphere of combat. Beyond the battlefield, American industry was producing artillery shells at unprecedented levels. By late 1944, output reached over 8 million rounds per month. A highly organized logistics network ensured that these munitions flowed from ports to firing positions without interruption. Communication systems linked all elements seamlessly, creating a level of operational synchronization that German forces had never encountered. The psychological impact of these rapid, concentrated barrages was profound. German military medical reports recorded unusually high rates of combat neurosis directly associated with the precision and intensity of American bombardments. Even soldiers who had survived long-duration Soviet artillery strikes on the Eastern Front were overwhelmed by these brief but overwhelming American barrages. The immediacy of the fire deprived soldiers of any mental preparation. They could not predict or adapt to the attack, leaving them entirely unshielded from its psychological effects. Field hospitals noted unusual and severe symptoms among troops subjected to repeated barrages. Soldiers experienced sudden paralysis in response to sharp sounds, difficulty processing multiple simultaneous stimuli, and an intense, almost pathological fear of synchronized events. Unlike typical shell shock, which sometimes improved with rest, these conditions persisted even after removal from the front lines. Fritz Bohlin, a German officer, described the aftermath with stark clarity. "The front resembles a lunar landscape, and roughly 70% of my men are either dead, incapacitated, or mentally shattered. Every forward tank has been disabled, and the supply routes are nearly impassable." General Hans Ebbach corroborated these observations, emphasizing the impossibility of moving reinforcements or evacuating casualties due to the dense fire curtain of American shells. He noted that the United States had developed an artillery concentration system far beyond German expectations. Captured documents from Wehrmacht command revealed frantic efforts to counter these tactics. Reports from weapons testing offices concluded that American coordination depended not only on superior firepower, but on advanced computational methods and integrated communication systems. German assessments recognized that no existing countermeasures could effectively challenge these techniques. Attempts by the Germans to replicate American barrages exposed fundamental shortcomings. Although they could calculate projectile flight times, they lacked standardized ammunition, consistent communications, trained personnel, and, most critically, the industrial infrastructure required to sustain large-scale coordinated fire. Without these foundational elements, precise replication of American methods remained impossible. During World War II, German artillery units rarely executed large-scale coordinated barrages. Typical operations involved only 2 to 4 batteries at a time, and the resulting fire was only roughly synchronized. The most ambitious German effort occurred during the Nordwind offensive in January 1945, when 8 batteries were brought together. Even then, the shells struck over a period of 12 seconds. By contrast, as U.S. troops advanced into Germany in the early months of 1945, the use of time-on-target artillery became a standard preparatory tactic. These barrages were meticulously timed so that multiple batteries would hit simultaneously, maximizing shock and disorientation. In one notable instance at Cologne on March 5, 1945, the city's garrison surrendered after enduring just a single one-minute barrage. The commander reported that continued resistance was futile in the face of such overwhelming firepower. Similar scenarios unfolded across Germany in the war's final months. Even officers who had led determined defensive campaigns for years often chose to surrender after experiencing relatively brief, precisely coordinated bombardments. The psychological impact of synchronized artillery had reached such intensity that in many cases, the mere threat of it could force a capitulation without a fight. The effectiveness of this method did not go unnoticed by other nations. Soviet military observers closely analyzed the American approach, while British commanders were similarly struck by its efficiency. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery reflected in his memoirs that the U.S. time-on-target approach revealed a new paradigm in warfare. Logistical and organizational superiority had become more decisive than traditional martial qualities such as bravery, discipline, or tactical ingenuity. The German experience with American artillery techniques left a lasting imprint on post-war military doctrine. When the Bundeswehr was established in 1955, the ability to conduct coordinated fires was prioritized, with direct reference to lessons learned from encounters with U.S. forces. The French Army, through its Elder program, adapted its artillery training based on German reports. Israel, upon forming its defense forces in 1948, incorporated time-on-target principles from the outset, guided by Jewish American veterans who had served in U.S. artillery units. NATO doctrine also formalized these concepts, emphasizing that precise coordination could offset numerical disadvantages when facing larger Warsaw Pact forces. In 1968, General Johannes Steinhoff, a former Luftwaffe fighter pilot and later NATO Military Committee chairman, summarized the enduring lesson. Achieving superiority in synchronization and coordination can decisively overcome an opponent's numerical and material advantages. The legacy of American time-on-target fire reshaped modern artillery doctrine, illustrating that the systematic application of concentrated simultaneous firepower could dominate even the most stubborn resistance. The development of computational techniques for coordinating artillery strikes laid the foundation for what would become modern military technology. American artillery units, through the creation of graphical firing tables and rapid calculation methods, effectively anticipated the emergence of computerized fire control systems. The encounter between German forces and American artillery employing precise timing techniques represented a transformative episode in military history. It illustrated the shift of warfare from a domain dominated by individual skill and battlefield experience to one governed by systematic planning and technological coordination. German soldiers, trained within one of the most disciplined and professional military cultures in history, found themselves outmatched not because of inferior training or bravery, but because they faced an adversary capable of orchestrating its resources with unprecedented precision. The sudden, overwhelming artillery barrages experienced in Normandy were more than an exhibition of American firepower. They signaled the rise of a form of warfare where organizational efficiency and industrial capability determined success. The German Wehrmacht's defeat was not a consequence of being outgunned in the traditional sense. It was the superiority of integrated systems that proved decisive. Courage alone could not counteract the meticulous coordination of fire, nor could tactical skill overcome the systematic application of industrial resources to military operations. American innovations in timed artillery strikes disrupted long-held assumptions about the conduct of war. The synchronized bombardments that struck German positions between 1944 and 1945 exemplified a new era in which military victory increasingly depended on the ability to. The influence of this transformation continues to shape military doctrine around the globe. Every modern artillery unit, every structured military organization, and every large-scale coordinated operation bears the imprint of the principles established by these innovations. The German soldiers who endured these attacks witnessed firsthand the dawn of a new age in combat, one in which mathematical precision and organized logistics could outweigh centuries of martial tradition. In the industrialized era of war, systematic planning consistently outperforms individual heroism, structured coordination surpasses personal skill, and the disciplined application of resources overrides traditional battlefield tactics. The lesson was unambiguously clear to the German forces. In a conflict defined by industrial capacity, the ability to harmonize complex systems could determine the outcome of entire campaigns. The instantaneous, overwhelming power of American artillery, perfectly timed and methodically executed, redefined the very nature of warfare, marking a permanent shift in how wars would be fought thereafter.